The 100 Kingdoms. Sheltered by the selfless sacrifices of the last legion, the refugees that managed to escape the cataclysm of the fall will survive the long winter that followed, and in time prosper to found one of the largest and most diverse bastions of human civilizations on Ea. Today, the 100 Kingdoms extend from the sheltered heartlands by the Bitter Sea all the way to the lands of Rus, which stretch against the Klosterine Mountains before one descends into corruption and darkness spawned by the fall beyond them. Despite the best efforts of the Orders, the spiritual successors to the legendary Last Legion, the 100 Kingdoms have been riven by war almost from the moment the first desperate refugees laid eyes on the Bitter Sea. Peace had only visited their land twice, once upon the return of the Orders from the Klosterine Wall at the onset of the long winter, and again during the rule of the Armatellum dynasty that managed to briefly unite the 100 Kingdoms under one banner and found the Telian Empire. The tragic end of that dynasty saw the empire plunged into chaos and brought the resurgence of the 100 Kingdoms. Today, the Hallowed Throne and a few key institutions are all that remain of the empire, while year after year would-be emperors and conquerors perpetuate the cycle of violence that make an empire a quickly fading dream. With spires and Dweghold holds scattered in their lands, pressured by the constant aggression of Nord raids and riven by centuries of intersign warfare, the 100 Kingdoms are militarized to an unprecedented degree. The feudal system that underpinned the old society is buckling under the assault of an increasingly complex trade-based economy and an ever-increasing demand for manpower. A new class of professional soldier has risen, men and women who fight not for land or obligation, but for simple gold. While these men-at-arms are covering the demand for manpower across the 100 Kingdoms, they also represent a significant destabilizing force. Power is starting to swift away from the traditional land-owning aristocracy and into the hands of their rulers, who hold the rights of taxation and can use that coin to purchase the manpower they need to keep their recalcitrant vassals under control. To this volatile mix, one must add the growing assertiveness of the Faith. Their extensive holdings and alliances with the nobility are allowing them to circumvent the old covenants and fuel the military force through proxies. As long dissuaded muscles are being flexed, the ancient animosity between faiths is coming to the fore, with the theist and deist dogmas marshalling their power and supporters getting ready to take their arguments from the religious councils and onto the battlefield. Standing against this rising tide are the Orders, warriors without peer whose prowess verges on the supernatural, a mantle and burden inherited from the shattered legion that birthed them. Bound by their common cause to protect mankind from a hostile world, the Orders are split along ideological lines on how best to do this. Ranging from the fanatical devotion of the Order of the Sword to the calculated interventions of the Order of the Sealed Temple, the Orders are the strongest check to this rising power and aggression of the Church and all too numerous local rulers. Allies in these efforts can be found among the remaining institutions of the Empire. In the desperate days that followed the collapse of the Telian Empire, the Imperial Conclave deemed the accumulated wealth of the Imperial family too great to risk distributing amongst its members. Thus the office of the Imperial Chamberlain was founded to manage the estate until a new emperor could be elected. Though his direct power is limited, the Imperial Chamberlain holds tremendous influence amongst the Imperial institutions he funds and supports, the Mint and its Gilded Legion, the Collegia and the Imperial War Colleges, as well as the Imperial Courts, often the last hope of the common man to receive a just ruling. Despite the best and often stubborn efforts of the most influential of sovereigns, these institutions have retained a measure of autonomy and independence, providing a stabilizing factor among the claimants of the Hallowed Throne, in no small measure due to the terrifying efficiency of the Steel Legion, the only Imperial Legion that refused the call to disband following the death of the last emperor. As a result, the forces of the 100 Kingdoms can display tremendous variety, from staunchy traditional feudal levy, reinforced by men-at-arms hired by a sympathetic church, to an eclectic mix of professional Imperial legionnaires and feudal allies, stitched together by the Imperial Chamberlain and backed by the brutal pragmatism of the Order of the Crimson Throne. Fate of the Legions: Adamantine and Smoke. At the height of the Tilian Empire, there were 6 legions that answered only to the Imperial throne. Of these, only 2 survived the collapse of the Empire in any recognizable form: the Gilded Legion and the Steel Legion. The others ceased to exist as independent units. This, however, did not mean that they disappeared entirely, that their influence is not still felt today, or that their fate has not inspired, for better or worse, throughout the years. The Adamantine Legion was the Imperial bodyguard, its legionnaires considered the Emperor's own. With members handpicked for their skill, discipline, and loyalty, majestically armored in full plate with covered faces, filigreed and gilded in adamant, they accompanied the Emperor and the Imperial family everywhere. Their traditional weapon was a ceremonial greatsword, although they were required to master smaller blades as well. The assassination of the Emperor was a death blow to this legendary bodyguard, in both bodies and spirit. Over half of the, already undersized at the time, legion fell during the attack itself. The remainders, often the unlanded sons of powerful nobility, were recalled by their families during the frenzied political maneuvering that followed the collapse of the empire and the establishment of the conclave. Be it by shame or fear, few refused, and the order for the legion to disband that followed was a mere formality. To their credit, all returned their gear, shy shadows that visited the armory under cover of night. Once the pride of the Empire, the Adamantine Legion, had been shrouded in shame. What is left today of this legendary bodyguard is a lingering sense of regret and failure that accompanies one as one walks through the fantastically armored mannequins of the Imperial armories. While it was the first legion to be officially disbanded, the Legion of Smoke is the one most remembered. The decree to disband became known as Declementia, referring to the legion's nickname of the Emperor's Clemency. For any convict could request to be transferred to the legion for 10 years instead of serving their sentence for any crime short of treason. The more cynical would attribute a different meaning to the name. This was the dark hand of the Emperor. Black-souled villains who the Empire marked, used and discarded, deployed against those the Emperor did not want simply defeated. He wanted them destroyed. Despite the origin of its men, discipline within the ranks was legendary, as were the punishments for misconduct and desertion. It is worth noting that dedicated historians have found some inconsistencies that simply do not fit the popular narrative. If the Legion was so dreadful and the criminals who populated such villains, how was it such a fearsome force? Why are there so few actual records of deserters or their bounties? Why are there no records of retirement, nor decommissioned equipment stored? More importantly, what happened to the marked legionnaires after the Legion was dissolved? Shouldn't the release of thousands of hardened, trained murderers have made a mark even in the chaos that followed the assassination of the Emperor? Fate of the Legions: Ash and Argent. The Legion of Ash was perhaps the most unorthodox of legions. They were the wandering trackers and slayers of all manner of monster and beast that beset the population of the Empire. In the early Empire, the Emperor was forced to place bounties on the heads of those beasts and monsters that preyed on his population. At first, only well-trained groups would undertake such tasks, mostly hardened veterans and accomplished sellswords whose experience outweighed the passing of their prime. But as the fame of these individuals increased and the bounties grew in number, so did the mercenaries who flocked to earn them, thinking it a quick way to make fame and fortune. It soon became clear that rules and guidelines had to be established, as these mercenaries would start ambushing each other rather than the monsters, while the truly proficient among them would demand higher bounties or turn to less official contracts. Rather than establish a bounty hunters guild, the Emperor created a new legion dedicated to the task. The Legion of Ash kept institutionalized bounties as their reward structure rather than a steady wage, and demanded the organizing units to promote skill, communication, and transmission, while offering better and specialized training. While it was not the only group of bounty hunters, the Legion of Ash was by far the most populated and rewarding. After all, the largest employer of legal bounties was the Emperor, and they all but monopolized their fulfillment. This monopoly, however, would prove to be the Legion's downfall. With the collapse of the Empire, the financial demands of the dissolution itself, as well as the limitations and supervision imposed on the Chamberlain's office by the Conclave, swiftly saw the Imperial bounties discontinued. The Legion of Ash disbanded almost by default, with little to no protest by its members. An unprecedented number of swords for hire became available almost overnight, adding to the chaos of the time. Without a doubt, many of the Legionnaires of Ash found their ways to the ranks of those nobles that could afford them, while others would begin fulfilling bounty contracts of a less than savory nature. Still, the need for monster slaying never ceased, and if one were to scratch the surface of the hunter cadres, or cadets, whatever, who knows what one might discover. The Argent Legion was by far the largest force the Emperor could muster. It more accurately should have been described as the Argent Legions, but by keeping them as a single force, he made it harder for his opponents to accurately measure his standing army. During the dissolution of the Empire, the decommissioning of so many soldiers was a delicate matter, as no lord of the realm wanted an Imperial army on his lands when its legionnaires found out they were no longer employed. As a result, the decision was made to recall the Argent Legion and guarantee their full pay, ostensibly with the goal of dismissing them when they were gathered on the Kalenian's fields of Argem. This matter was crucially decided before the establishment of the office of the Imperial Chamberlain. What nobody had counted on was the sheer scope of the project. As the legionnaires started pouring in, it quickly became evident that paying this many soldiers would be a daunting task in of itself. As the weeks stretched into months, temporary structures were erected to house the Imperial bureaucrats who would pay the soldiers. As the months began piling upon each other and the legion still streamed to Argem, the ranking officers ordered the temporary constructions of barracks to house their soldiers, expanding into the slums that had surrounded the fields for decades, and commissioned the digging of proper sanitations as latrines were simply no longer enough. Another complication resulted from the long-established payment terms for the legions. As the rules stood, a legion had to be active to receive full pay, and the legionnaires refused to spend months waiting on half pay, so they continued their regular activities, training, and recruiting throughout the process. By the time the last legionnaire had been paid off, years had passed, and the coffers of the members of the Conclave had been bled dry. A factor that no doubt dampened the flames of aggression that could have torn the Empire asunder in those vulnerable years. Still, the fabled Argent Legion of the Empire was no more. Or was it? Drilled perfectionists and lifelong soldiers, the Legion's officers would not spend their time idly during the years of waiting. Their training regimes would be revisited and refined during the endless drilling sessions, while theory and strategy would be discussed almost daily in the officer lounges. In time, the temporary residence and training fields of the Argent Legion would become the foundation of the war colleges, where the best soldiers and officers in the 100 Kingdoms still receive their education to this day. The last to stand guard. Most of the events of the fall and the Old Dominion are forgotten today, save perhaps by the most learned of scholars. Rumors from the last waves of refugees would in time become legends, myths, and bardic tales. Perhaps the song that has endured most since ancient times is The Last to Stand. In a metaphor that captures the bravery and sacrifice of the last legion, the last to stand praises their patron god as the last standing god of the Pantheon. The song names Cleon as the last refugee to arrive at the gates of the Gap, appearing before the gates long after even the last of the refugees had passed, with his weapons shattered and his armor rent, carrying the body of the goddess Ninhua in his arms. Alone, surrounded by the darkness of the long winter and the smoke and ash of the fall, Cleon remained true to his role as warrior and protector. He kept fighting to safeguard the passage west for any who could be saved, battling mad old gods, bloodthirsty worshippers who carved human flesh, and the rotting remnants of the Dominion. Drained, dying, Cleon asked to be given a warrior's death at the hands of his own followers, naming them as first knights to follow the first. Many a knight-errant of the Order of the Shield have been known to sing this song in their travels, reminding common folk that the Order still stands for the values of the Legion that birthed it. In a variation especially popular among the Bren highlands, Cleon delivers the body of Ninhua to Achelous, a Celtian legionary. He is trusted to carry it to her favored people, a metaphor for their descendants, who never forgot the protector of their forefathers and in fact still worship the mother above all aspects to this day. A separate song, The Parting Gift, reiterates this motif and expands on the goddess's role. It was her blessing that offered the waters of a vast lake, the bounty as her gift to her people, and the answer to the whispers of a promised land the Kiltoni druids spoke of. To make the bounty, Ninhua passed on all her remaining strength, ensuring that the destruction of the fall would be mitigated, and that even in the cold darkness of the long winter, her people would have shelter and fertile land. In time her gift would turn sour, and the bounty would become the bitter sea, as its waters mixed with the salty tears of the survivors of the Dominion. Many more songs explore the final deeds of these two gods, and all of them speak of their sacrifice in the end. Considering their continuous efforts to counter Hazila's mad schemes, this is very possibly true. While the real fate of Ninhua and Cleon is obscured behind too thick a veil of myth and song, it is a testament to their success that to this day folk of the 100 Kingdoms remember these two gods and their sacrifices, one way or another. The Pantheon and the Aspects. Considering the mosaic of different tribes, cultures, and even languages that were assimilated by the Old Dominion, one can begin to glimpse the Herculean task that Hazila undertook in the creation and shaping of the Pantheon. His success allowed him to establish himself as the leader of the Pantheon, whipping most other religions and practices that did not worship him as the All-Father. By the time Hazila decided to shape the Pantheon around him, his insight of the human psyche was immense. This made evident very easily as the image of the Pantheon he helped forge persists to the present day, expressing humanity's desire to worship throughout the ages. 12 were the Pantheon's main deities, each, however, with a retinue of lesser deities, demi-deities, angelic figures, and servants expressing more specific virtues of each deity's aspect, to ensure their control. Indeed, to this day, there's a direct correlation between the roles of Hazila's Pantheon, for instance, and the deist aspects of the 100 Kingdoms. Even the tastes, in their intricate tenets of their worship that hide behind the idea of a single deity, recognize and worship separately lesser expressions of Theos' will, as well as archangels and saints that mirror these archetypes. The Father/Ruler. Then I saw the first of lights and heard one of the seven speak with the voice of authority. I am come. I looked, and behold, the brightest of the sun's golden rays crowning his head, a hammer in one hand, his other hand empty, waiting Hazilas, Samasha, Raf, Solficus, Elia the Lightbringer, the Son of Light, the All-Father, the Fountain of Creation. Book of Light 2 with 25 to 27. The Mother. There is no known civilization, modern or ancient, living or extinct, that does not include the aspect of the mother in their worship. From Demtra, the old Helitian goddess, or Nen Ishtar, the fertile mother of the Neantali, to Insha, the seed of Yinlong, found even inside Yankuma and Uma, the first woman of the Caliphates. The mother is not only worshipped but adored as a very important figure. Even the strictest of the epistomons of the city-states, in their flat-out denial of any worship, have personified Sophia, the wisdom of knowledge in avatars similar to that of Ninhua. Milkos Mulner, the Aspects. The Knight. My sword to you, Protus, warrior divine, and so that is drawn for your glory. My shield to you, Sabathus, celestial protector, so that it guards through your grace. My mind to you, Ninurutu, wisdom of war, so that it follows in your virtue. My death to you, Cleon, first of knights, my gift for all of yours. Whether I live or die, I am yours. Holy, 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 Lord Knight, glory to your name, thy will be done. The last battle prayer of the 12th Legion, Perintax, the Seer. The seer, or the bureaucrat in the modern form of the aspect, according to some deists, was possibly the least celebrated deity of the celestial host, and yet amongst the oldest archetypes known to mankind. For the ancient Picts, before being assimilated by the Dominion, the aspect was the creator, the god-child Nabu Asteris, roaming the night sky as the constellation known to them as the Boatman, and to us as the Scales. All life, the Picts believed, is but stories devised by the Sky Sailor. When astrology spread and the Dominion expanded, Nabu naturally followed as a deity of prophecy and knowledge, abandoning his boy incarnation, infusing with Orcos, the star seer of the Cerminians. It was only during the latter days of the Dominion that he assumed a role that distanced him from the everyday worship as the judge of the departed, knowing better than anyone the secrets of all souls. Milkos Mulner, the Aspects. The Fool/the Trickster. Of endless shifts, witty and cunning, a robber, a horse thief, a bringer of dreams, a watcher by night, a thief at the gates, one who was soon to show forth wonderful deeds among the gods and mortals, with names as many as the orange feathers in his hair: Bacchus, Stanmus, Leocundis, Dionos, Hermus, the tempter of odds, the trick of light, the laugh of God. Hymens 6:12. The Crafter. But the Crafter is now a burden. It limits him as a ruler. It limits his range of perception. From his new position, he begins to see the laws of reality more clearly. So he visits Festus, a mortal smith. He promises him secrets in his craft that no one has ever heard before. In exchange, he is to live in solitude, deaf and mute to his mortal world. The mortal agrees. Festus becomes a living legend, playing a vital role in the technological peak the Dominion reached, and in time the crafter aspect swifts from Hazila, who can now expand fully to the Father. Hazila becomes the All-Father, a god thus far unnamed and unshaped. Under the fate of mortals, reality swifts. Hazila is and has been the Father, the ruler, king of gods and men. Festus is the crafter, but hints remain that betray the truth. The red fire of creation in his hair, forge hammer in one hand and pillars in the other, Festos, Varagos, Volcunus, Hazmash, and the one who makes the forger of all crafts. How different really is the imagery from the Father, with the sun's golden rays crowning his head, a hammer in one hand. Forbidden texts of the Panecticum library, attributed to the anathematic, the Magi. Then from the presence of all the seven I saw an eighth light, and heard its voice speak in unison. I am come. I looked, and behold, clad in translucent robes, two bodies, backs united, Lady, Kark, Aurora, Zoria, Hecate, and the Lord Hecas, Artarus, Volos, Metatros, and the Master of all possibilities, the Lord of skies and Lady of earth, the artists of creation. Book of Light 2:35-36. The Untamed, the Beast and the Barbarian. Much like the Magi, the Untamed presented a dual manifestation, its visage a combination of man and beast. At first, those who were possibly heavily influenced by the pagan tribes who worshipped animal gods in the Old Dominion. But in time, the two faces of the Untamed were split into what would become the Beast and the Barbarian. Today, they are worshipped by and large separately, but the very existence of the Nords explains the Untamed's persistence in being remembered as a single entity now and then. The difference of the two aspects lies in their place, of sorts, but their core remains the same. Whether by nature or choice, the Untamed exists outside the established society of man. The beast is the untamed wild, the part of the world that can never be part of civilization. To this day, deists often name wandering monsters as its manifestations. There is a tendency to perceive the beast as evil, but as the deist questor of the beast, Rolf Håkansson, has written in his Beast Within, it is not so, even in its most monstrous apparitions. Gugalan, the chimera with the 3 mouths, Hunger, Herna, the antlered name for female dog, because I want monetization, Parenthood, Minos, the Bullman, Sexual Drive, Satet, the 3-eyed serpent, Survival. They are instincts, primal urges stripped from ulterior motives, neither evil nor good, and yet the birthing power of both. The very lack of logical, human thought behind those, however, turns the beast into a very frightening aspect indeed. The second manifestation is that of the barbarian, and unlike the beast's connection to the wild, the barbarian is very much human and often part of society, both lawless and lawbreaker, denying to conform to the mandates of civilization. It is really not that hard to understand why the barbarian was conceived as an aspect by Hazila. Bubdu, Hokar, Ferus, the wild, the lawless, the untouched, the place where all light aims to reach, says the Book of Light. Where all light aims to reach. What a better way for an expanding religious state to convince its subjects to one's conquest after the other than a deity that exists within the sole purpose of being, eventually, conquered, but being ever so elusive. Today, while the analogy of the barbarian to the Nords is obvious and easy, the truth is that the deists often name agitators, renegades, and rebels as aspects manifest of the barbarian. Sophides, Rational Fate. The Soldier. Let kings worship, rulers and heroes worship knights. Let the queens wear the mantles of mother to disguise their ambition. Let hunters worship beasts and barbarians, and let mages worship twin heads. And while they do so, I ask, who was there in all the battles ever fought? Who fought with nature over crop fields at all times of peace, and fought enemies over battlefields at all times of war? It was no king or queen, it was no mage, it was no knight. They only exist to reveal in moments of history, not every day. It was you, people, the simple people, the true people. You have your own aspect, your own protector, you who work tirelessly, you who fight endlessly. Remember the poet, who bears the greatest burden, I wonder, the greatest king's head, a single crown it lies under, but who carries the scythe, who carries the spear, who fought without choice, yet also fought without fear. The weight of history always fell on one's shoulder. Hail thee, unsung hero, hail thee, unknown soldier. Quester of the Soldier, Dwan Johnson. The Lover. Sometimes one must wonder on the nature of the heathens. Often has the church been chastised for its denial to accept the so-called lover aspect as a saint, claiming there are no examples of lovers in our prayers. They say we deny our faithful something natural. I say the quality of one's faith is measured by his teachings. What do they say? What do they worship? Amos was the archer whose arrows started the War of 11 Lilies in Galania, before the empire, says the Galan deist, bringing love to youths of multiple feuding families. Eros, says an excommunicated poet, is the cause of misery and that took the life of 2 blooming adolescents by their own hands no less, and that play so loved by wistful youth of the nobility. Inandite was the temptress who offered another's wife to Pantheon, igniting the Illyrian campaigns. Further back in time, Isha, another archer apparently, spread chaos amongst the clans of the Neon people before salvation came by the Old Dominion. They say they preach love, but all they really preach is war and chaos. They say such is our world, but I say such is them. Brother Jerima of Sankt Volto. The Wanderer. These proclaim the wonder exists in every age. Ha! Fools! I have searched far and wide, and in all my travels and all my exploits, I have never encountered such an entity. Captain Raycom Malinlones. The Victim. Perhaps the most bizarre apparition of the divine in the old Pantheon was the Victim. It never bore a name, and its church was always small and discarded by history as a non-factor. There is strong evidence that it endured the long centuries leading to Hazila's fall, where Ironically, it was destroyed entirely as they never joined the refugees, but rather stayed to help those in need in Capitas. After all, they were many. Very few deists remember this aspect today, and even fewer venerate it. But the truth is that their charity work is unparalleled and their paradigm simple. Say a prayer for the fallen and remember their innocence. So fides, rational faith. Nobility. In the early days after the fall, when each kingdom was but a fortified settlement on the shores of the bitter sea, nobility was defined by the ability to enforce one's claim to it. The arrival of the order simplified matters. No petty tyrant or bandit king could hope to challenge an opponent who was backed by the order's brethren. This quickly resulted in a consolidation of power amongst those noble houses that courted the support of the orders. As the long winter ended and the population exploded, spreading to more distant lands, the limited manpower of the order saw this simple paradigm come to an end. Freed from the shackles the order had imposed on it, the influence of the theist church quickly grew, forming a symbiotic relationship with the nobility. The nobles funded and protected the church, while the church expounded on the divine rights of the nobility, filling the void left by the orders in the ratification of nobility's claims. Legitimacy was no longer determined by acquiescence of the nobility to the wishes of the orders, but a divinely granted mandate regulated by the theist church. Still insufficiently manned, the orders had to find new means of controlling nobility. After the disaster of the Red Years, they found a tool. They sought in the nascent Telian Empire. The rise of the Telian Empire, as well as the spread of the deist creed, put an end to this newfound freedom of the nobility. Nobles either bent the knee to the new emperor or were replaced. Backed by the orders and supported by the same church doctrine, the emperor seemed unassailable. But while many resented the governorship of a distant figure, few could argue that the nobility flourished under the Armatellum rule and the stability it provided. Today, with the emperor gone and the church and the orders at each other's throat, the nobility are a hereditary self-proven fact, ruling the 100 kingdoms almost unimpeded. They are broadly split into two groups: the imperialists, who wish to see a new emperor elected, and the sovereigns, who wish to see an end to the very idea of empire. Ironically, both of these factions see the future in the Imperial Conclave, a gathering of all the potentates in the 100 kingdoms, called every 4 years to issue decrees with the authority of the emperor. Putting their differences aside, both groups have come together in the conclave to muzzle the orders, preventing them from intervening in their internal politics, curb the power of the Chamberlain and the remaining imperial institutions, and limit the influence of the church. Free from the influence of a higher authority, the nobility have turned to their personal agendas with a vengeance. The very name of the 100 kingdoms is a result of the influence of the nobility. Their power games in the conclave result in an almost daily redrawing of the political map of the Telian Empire, as inheritance, betrayal, and marriage have become favorite tools, with armed conquest reserved as the last argument of kings. The Orders. The Orders are the oldest and most powerful armed forces in the 100 Kingdoms, created following the collapse of the only legion that survived the fall of the Old Dominion. The battles and sacrifices that the Legion undertook to shield humanity from the nightmares of the fall took too heavy a toll on its surviving members and fragmented the Legion. The Orders today are direct descendants of the original diaspora, each order seeking to do its best in protecting humanity from what it sees as the greatest threat. Sometimes this is through direct action, following the more martial traditions of the Order of the Sword or the Order of the Crimson Tower. More often than not, it is through the tremendous influence the Order of the Sealed Temple and its vast wealth, backed by the subtle threat of military reprisal. They were the force behind the establishment of the Militia Act that severely cumbered the power of the nobility, as well as the main reason the church has not been able to convince the Imperial Conclave to reinside the laws limiting their armed forces to bodyguard details. Looking further back, one can see their support in the very foundation of the Telian Empire, the spread of the deist creed, and the establishment of the guild system. Whether it is with an iron gauntlet or a velvet glove, the Order's hand can be seen shaping the history of the 100 Kingdoms at every turn. Many argue this parentistic attitude has caused more harm than good. They point at the destructive chaos of the Red Years sparked by their premature attempts at unifying the 100 Kingdoms, or the bloody riots that followed the summary execution of the beloved Archbishop Nicholas during his regency. Despite this, the Orders have long maintained a good relationship with the common people of the 100 Kingdoms, who praise them as heroes and benefactors. The monumental sacrifice of the Order of the Sword in the North invasions, the selfish heroism of the Order of the Shield's knight-errant, and the tirelessly public work of the Brothers Mendicant of the Order of the Seal Temple have long since swayed the hearts and minds of the common folk. With the collapse of the Empire, the Orders lost much of their influence as they were heavily invested in the office of the Emperor, at the expense of both the nobility and the Church. When these two pillars aligned against them, there was little the Orders could do without resorting to war. Learning from their past mistakes, the Orders took a long view and withdrew. Though their influence might be a fraction of what it once was, their military might has not dimmed in the least, echoing the prowess of the legendary legion that birthed them. Fate. The issue of the fate in the 100 Kingdoms is intricately linked to the fall. The eldest of the two faiths, commonly called the Theist Church, does not deny the fall itself, rather it denies its significance. They argue that it was mankind itself that fell, not the divinity. The divinity was cast out from heaven for its failure to guide humanity on the path of righteousness. In their doctrine, the fall is the literal and figurative punishment of man by God, the Theos. For our failures, he casts away mankind's greatest champion and has left us to languish without his guidance. The few believers that were spared from the fall were God's chosen, and following them is the last chance mankind has at redeeming itself. It is thus humanity's duty to rectify this grievous state of affairs, to move away from its life of sin and decadence, and follow the chosen of the Theos back into the light. The Theist Church is one of high ritual and deep tradition, stretching all the way back to the original practices of the Old Dominion, before the pride of man corrupted it. They enjoy tremendous support from the nobility as their doctrine of the chosen has been graciously extended to the nobility through the divine right of kings. The Deist Creed, on the other hand, argues that the fall of the divinity was due to mankind and its flawed vision of perfection. They argue that God is a perfect distillation of man rather than man an imperfect copy of God, and that our limited perception of this perfection twisted what was once whole and pure through need and prayer, warping it so badly it fell. They argue that the only way for humanity to worship the divine is by choosing to worship those aspects we each understand and embody the best. Thus, to come closer to divinity, one needs to not be born amongst the chosen, but embody those aspects of the divine as closely as possible. Unlike the Theist Church, the Deist Creed is not a centralized religion, rather a religious movement. So forming a consensus on what exactly the aspects are is a matter of heated theological debate. Their dogma of enlightenment and advancement through self-improvement and hard work rather than abstinence and obedience has spread like wildfire amongst the downtrodden who see in this philosophy a chance to rise beyond their limited means. As a result, religious disputes have become an extension of social differences, making confrontation all but inevitable. The power of the faith was kept in check by the emperor and the orders, but with the collapse of the empire, both churches have seen their influence grow in heaps and bounds. While still limited to fielding only their dreaded bodyguards, the fanatic Sicari, by ancient imperial decree, the time is soon coming when neither order influence on the imperial conclave nor feudal resentment at armed forces other than their own will keep the churches from resolving their theological disputes on the field of battle. Imperial remnants. With the death of Otto IV, the last emperor, the fate of the empire seemed sealed. The nobility used the imperial conclave, called by the emperor himself, to muzzle the orders, shackle the church, and dissolve the legions. Without these bastions of imperial strength, nobody would have the power to challenge their claims. The empire was doomed, never to threaten the rule of the nobles again. Or so they thought. Reality was not so simple, and the idea of the empire proved much more resilient than its enemies counted on. As the situation spiraled out of control, the survival of the empire came down to the fateful decision of the Steel Legion. Ordered by the Imperial Conclave to disband, the Steel Legion simply refused. They pitched camp within the Clanian fields of Argent and announced that the Empire's capital and all of its visitors were under their protection. Reluctant or unable to challenge the Legion individually, the noble houses delayed in their response and calmer heads were able to prevail. The problem did not lie with the Empire, they argued, rather it lay with the role of the Emperor. In the absence of an Emperor, what more could the nobility want from the current status quo? The answer, of course, was the Imperial estate. Every noble coveted the wealth and influence that came from the title of Emperor, but even more than coveting it, they feared it would fall into the hands of their opponents. Thus, in a uniquely inspired compromise, the seasoned political minds of the nobility that attended the Imperial Conclave struck upon an agreement that pleased no one but satisfied them all. The Imperial estate would be managed by the Imperial Chamberlain until a new emperor could be elected, whose integrity and neutrality would be guaranteed by the Steel Legion and the Imperial Conclave. To this day, the Imperial remnants continue to thrive, funded by the immense wealth of the Imperial estate. The Chamberlain retains control over the Mint and its Gilded Legion, as well as the Collegia and the Imperial Courts. Even if the Imperial Conclave has stripped their ability to rule on high crimes among nobles, the Imperial Courts continue ruling on low cases, granting commoners a chance at a fair hearing, assuming they can petition their case. The Chamberlain also retains the services of the Imperial Ranger Corps to ensure the sanctity of the far-flung properties of the Emperor, often leading their services out to loyal imperialist houses as they are needed. They also serve as the Chamberlain's eyes and ears to lands beyond his direct influence. In addition, he has chartered the dreaded Steel Legion to defend the material interests of the estate in view of noble aggression. This had made the office of the Chamberlain the single biggest employer of the Steel Legion, even if they continue to supplement their income by taking on outside contracts so long as those promote the interests of the Empire. Lastly, it is the Chamberlain's duty to host and preside over the Imperial Conclave every 4 years, a gathering of the nobility and leaders of the 100 Kingdoms to discuss matters of state ranging from trade and border disputes to the election of a new emperor. Although the empire has endured over 100 years without a candidate coming close to election, this is still a monumentous event that sees the potentates from throughout the kingdoms gather for a fortnight of debauchery, power politics, and intrigue. The office of the Chamberlain quickly evolved from a prescribed managerial position to a powerful force in the daily reality of the 100 Kingdoms. By exploiting smaller titles and estates once held by the emperor to secure votes, it exerts significant influence on the Imperial Conclave, where its neutral position acts not only to protect the imperial institutions and estate, but also as a foil against the more extreme elements which seek to undermine the imperial legacy. When even these subtle methods prove inadequate, it can call upon the military might of the two greatest fighting forces in the 100 Kingdoms, the two remaining Imperial Legions, as well as the Imperial Ranger Corps and the ingenuity of the Imperial War Colleges. Priority Commander. All of the orders have adopted a loosely decentralized model of operations for their forces. This is in large part due to the conflicting nature of their goals, but also closely tied to the idealism of their cause and the zeal with which they pursue it. Most orders' forces are concentrated in small groups called cloisters that usually operate from a single fortified monastery or abbey. A priority commander is the greatest amongst his peers, elected by them to lead them in combat and represent their interests at the round table of Argent. Mounted Noble Lord. No matter how old and established a noble house is, in the 100 Kingdoms none have forgotten the wise aged. Power flows from the edge of the blade. As a result, all houses, no matter how humble or imposing, can always count on noble scions trained in the art of war to lead their troops. These noble lords have trained from youth in the arts of swordsmanship and mounted combat, the wealthiest amongst them even attending the proud war colleges in Argent. Whatever the specifics, few question that many a noble's right to command does not derive simply from the blood coursing through their veins. The prestigious martial tradition of the 100 Kingdoms demands leaders whose men believe in, whose training and exercise foster confidence, and whose skill demand admiration. A noble lord who issues orders can reasonably expect his men to storm the battlement. One that leads from the front knows his men would brave the gates of hell. Noble Lord. Observing the history of the 100 Kingdoms and their nobles, it is perhaps no surprise that the vast majority of their houses have strong military traditions. When the long winter receded and humanity ventured far from the shores of the bitter sea, the orders stretched too thin to control the nobility. Soon the paradigm of might is right resurfaced among both aspiring and established rulers. To command swords became a matter of survival. To command them effectively promised a long rule in conquest. While the legitimacy of the divine right of kings offered by the Theist Church has swayed many, the old nobility knows that power flows from the edge of the blade. To this day, the training of a noble's heirs in all matters military is not just tradition, but standard practice. The source of a noble's education may vary vastly from one to another, and, while theory and strategy are essential parts of their education, there is no pampered or abstract training. Many a present noble lord was once a squire, no different than any other, having spent hours taking care of their sponsor's horse and equipment and earning their knighthood by blooding their blade. For those whose connections or wealth allow it, this is substituted by years of service as cadets in one of the Imperial military academies of Argent, where they undergo vigorous physical training while also receiving the best possible education on matters of strategy, siege warfare, and military statistics. Whatever the specifics, few question that many a noble's right to command does not derive simply... Okay, we've read this one. Theist priest. To those who are familiar with military structure and hierarchy, the structure of the Theist Church is remarkably similar to the command structure established by professional armies around Ea. It is perhaps only natural that the Theist Church has embraced the militarism that so pervades the 100 Kingdoms. Their origins are steeped in the lore of the Old Dominion, where both steel and fate armed and armored the armies of Hazila, and the earliest records of the Church apostles heed back to the turbulent times that followed the fall, the Exodus, and early years that named the Bitter Sea. Yet for all its military character and early militarism, the Theist Church is barred from maintaining a force under arms by one of the most powerfully enforced laws in the 100 Kingdoms, the Animus Possidendi. This decree was issued by Charles Armatulem himself and has survived his death, the end of his line, and even the partial collapse of the empire. Since the death of the last emperor, the Theist Church has time and again attempted to strike down the law, but to no avail, while the influence of the orders and the original backers and most fervent supporters of this law was vastly diminished with the collapse of the empire. The nobility are very reluctant to see another partially wielded military might, an area in which they hold an unopposed monopoly in the empire and have thus not supported it. The debacle that started the Red Years decades ago, a long conflict that threatened to asunder the early empire, gave the Theist Church some wiggle room. The persecution and martyrdom of St. Nicholas provided the Church with legal and political ammunition in need to ensure that while not ordained priests could command or lead men under arms, they were allowed to defend themselves. To this end, ordained members of the Theist Church would have the same rights to bear arms and armor as the nobility. But much more importantly, the Church would be allowed to legitimize the feared Sicari, fanatical warrior monks, as a genuine bodyguard. While practical impact of gaining the right to bear arms and the establishment of a very limited armed force are minor, the political and psychological consequences cannot be overstated. With the orders all but muzzled, the strong ties of some noble houses with the Theist Church have begun to tell. Adopting religious symbols in their military banners, these noble houses have taken up the cause of the Theist Church, or at least used religion as a stepping stone to further their own goal. Their motivation matters little in the Panaticum, and the leadership of the Theist Church has been very quick to respond to this new trend, ordaining large numbers of young nobles, thus creating strong bonds with their families. More importantly, however, it found a series of new ordinates led by bishops responsible for the pastoral care of military troops. These ordinates were first established with the troops of their allied noble families and have proven their worth to commoner and noble alike. After all, common reason argues even troops need their spiritual guide at their side, who needs to confess more than a soldier who kills? Who needs their spirit strengthened more than those who face the horrors of battle? And do they not have the right to have their last rites read to them? In the end, the legality of the issue matters little. The plain truth is that Theist priests openly walk the field of battle once more, surrounded by the Sicari and the devout, while wielding the power of Theos himself. Through their prayers, few commanders inspire greater devotion and respect. Imperial Officer. During the collapse of the Empire, all Imperial Legions bar 2 were disbanded. The Steel Legion, which simply refused, and the Gilded Legion that protects the Mint. The sudden disappearance of thousands of trained, angry, armed men into the fraying fabric of the collapsing empire could have shattered it. In a masterful and far-sighted maneuver, Georg Fafrson, the first Imperial Chamberlain, turned them instead into one of the most powerful cohesive forces in the Empire, the War Colleges. Today the War Colleges represent one of the only sources of higher education in the 100 Kingdoms. Wealthy and influential parents face only 3 real choices: War Colleges, the Church School, or an apprenticeship. The War Colleges remain by far the most popular choice. Despite their names, they teach a wide variety of topics, from philosophy to logistics, from numismatics to strategy, and from calisthenics to weapon training. Tuition is extortionate, and the full course is over a decade long. Of the candidates that apply and participate, only a fraction move on to become full graduates. Most are called back to attend filial duties or wash out of the demanding program. Those few that do fully graduate belong to the rarefied elite that will be employed by the imperial institutions, from the mint to the office of the Imperial Chamberlain itself. Whatever they do, not only do they carry the title of Imperial officers, but they remain such at heart, trained and forged by an Imperial mentality. This often reflects their council, granting the office of the Chamberlain and the Imperial institutions a friendly voice in almost every court. As it is a sad truth that these times most of these graduates find employment in much more martial pursuits. Countless Imperial officers are scattered throughout the 100 Kingdoms as advisors to kings, mercenary lords, and leaders of men. While they often return to their own houses, Imperial officers can be found in the command tents and leading the troops of many a powerful noble houses from the 100 Kingdoms. Few would turn away such an educated and well-trained officer, much less so when an Imperial officer present is the only way to deploy some of the most powerful forces that can be mustered on the field of battle. It is a known fact that the surviving Imperial legions vastly favor working with Imperial officers, as they share not just the similar training, but the same mentality and approach to war. Men serving under Imperial officers may find this a strict regiment, but no one has ever claimed that their officers have not earned their respect. Though no emperor sits on the hallowed throne, though countless squabbling nobles pick at the vulnerable tapestry of a once great empire, the Telian Empire is not dead. A fraction of its former glory shines in the efficiency, performance, and drill of any army commanded by an Imperial officer. Chapter Magic. To understand magic, one must first grasp that it is primordial in aspect. Balance remains anathema to it in almost any form. Human mages have long been considered the weakest practitioners of the art on Ea, their essence associated with creation as much as destruction with each of the elements, traditionally associated with balance equally represented. Without a series of imbalance, such as that present within the Dweghom, the power of a human can channel without assistance is severely limited. This is not to say that a fully trained chapter mage is not capable of turning the course of a battle, merely that he will do so through the opportune application of power at the right time, rather than through the overwhelming application of power on the battlefield the way a Dweghom pyromancer might. The chapter mages of the 100 Kingdoms have long been a powerful political tool, their magics more suited to the civilized environment of the courtrooms and balls than the raw elemental puissance demanded on the battlefield. Be one a noble, a bishop, or a merchant, keeping a chapter mage in one's retinue is proof of power and influence. Many have wondered why chapter mages, long considered amongst the most innovative and creative practitioners of this art, only rarely become more of a political power within the 100 Kingdoms as individuals or even organized institutions. The imbalanced soul, however, required by the practitioners often manifests as an excessive or compulsive mind, and so the very source of a chapter's mage power becomes the halt of their social and political success. The stories of temperamental and impulsive pyromancers, distracted and impatient allomancers, or plodding obsessive geomancers not a cultural cliché. Their esoteric obsessions and proclivities are manifestations of their own imbalanced souls and isolate them from mundane society, almost invariably turning them into pariahs or recluses. This necessary imbalance, made manifest in young human gifted, is what drives them to turn to the chapters, chartered schools funded by the Imperial Court for the identification, protection, and control of the gifted population of the Empire. These charters have characteristics as diverse as the individuals who congregate there. The pool of stillness caters mainly to geomancers and hydromancers, but also to allomancers seeking to still their unquiet soul. The Gates of Fire, considered to be the foremost battle mage training ground, attracts mostly pyromancers, but many allomancers and hydromancers have found solace in its strict regiments. Chapter schools, however, do not represent the only place a gifted student could hope to master the art. The churches are also aggressive recruits of those they claim possess the divine spark. Their aggressive, sometimes predatory recruiting strategies, making them natural enemies of the chapters and its practitioners. Even beyond these two redoubtable institutions, there are other, less conspicuous places where one might get trained if they possess the necessary will and aptitudes. Argent of the Order of the Shield. During the early reign of the 100 Kingdoms, the Order of the Shield took it upon itself to protect man from its most dangerous predators. Eschewing the combat formation of their predecessors, the Order of the Shield traveled the lands alone and sought to alleviate suffering where they could. The Emperor elevated their order to the rank of Imperial magistrates, allowing the errant knights of the Shield to work as judge, jury, and executioner against all but the most powerful of noble houses. This did not endear them to nobility, and when the last emperor died, one of their first moves was to seek out and destroy any member of the ancient order. Today there are few and far in between, but continue their thankless task of protecting the citizens and peasants of the 100 Kingdoms against all those who would prey upon them, especially the nobility itself. Neophyte. Modest, humble, and absolutely terrified, a neophyte really has no place on the battlefield. But devout warriors of the 100 Kingdoms are often accompanied by one nonetheless, capable of providing final rites and shriving the troops of their sins. The presence of a neophyte does little for the battle effectiveness of the troop, but does mark them as devout in the eyes of their generals and gods. Null Mage. Null mages are gifted in each of the four elements. While no human could hope to reach the pinnacle of power that Dweghom sorcerer could muster, it is a known truism that it is easier to destroy than create. Given his access to all of the elements, it is almost trivially easy for a null mage to dispel the efforts of even the most powerful mage, allowing the hunter-gatherer that hired him to finish the job safely and efficiently. Servite, or servite. a simple functionary of the ancillary branch of the vaunted Order of the Sealed Temple, the humble servite has probably done more work on improving the lot of the common peasant of the 100 Kingdoms than 100 nobles. By ensuring that their militia is well shod and fed, a commander of the 100 Kingdoms ensures they are where they need to be when they need to be. Armmaster. A noble lord on foot, surrounded by his loyal household guard, is a force to be reckoned with. A trained noble lord on foot, surrounded by his loyal household guard, as they are led by his loyal armmaster, something to behold. Drill Master. The training regime of the Steel Legion is as legendary as the unit itself. Those who have failed it speak with the harshest words to describe it, recounting drills and abuses, both physical and mental, and pressure that are hard to believe. Be such claims true or not, one thing is certain. Every single man and woman of the Steel Legion has gone through it, and their effectiveness on the field is undeniable, while their performance under the harshest of circumstances unflattering. While the worth of each of the legionnaires is unquestioned, an observant eye can see the source of their performance, for in the presence of the drill master, the legion's fervor and aggression is unstoppable. After all, it only makes sense for one to perform better when someone screams at one's ear during combat, asking what one's major malfunction is. Seasoned Veteran. A society as militarized as the 100 Kingdoms is bound to have a countless veteran armsmen roaming the lands. The Order and the office of the Imperial household have exerted tremendous effort to mitigate the destabilizing influence they could be to society, encouraging them to retire to border communities where they are hired to train the militia on Imperial wages subsidized by the Orders. However, there are always some hard-bitten veterans who cannot seem to stay away from the battlefield. Veterans of countless battles, these seasoned campaigners are invaluable to any commander, bolstering his front line and leading men by example. Imperial Rangers. The Imperial Ranger Corps was born in the early years of the Telian Empire, when its expansion gave the Imperial family more lands that it could reasonable and safely manage. A group of expert woodsmen was hired to explore, catalog, and safeguard these lands. After the fall of the Empire, successive chamberlains have reinforced and expanded the role of the Imperial Rangers, given their intimate knowledge of not only the Imperial household lands, but all lands in between, making them the fearsome force they are today, equally at home on the field as they are in the woods. Mounted Squires. Trained in the arts of combat almost from childhood, squires are a potent force on the field, even if they lack the panoply of a full knight. Often the youngest sons of landed nobles or wealthy burghers, their arms and equipment are a cut above what one would expect. Many noble houses have taken to fielding their squires in battle, rewarding them generously for their efforts, calculating that their breeding, education, and training are far more valuable and dependable than the simple mercenary motivation of a man-at-arms. Hunter-Catter, or whatever. The Hunter-Catter are bounty hunters, plain and simple. Gifted with the right tools and know-how, they are tasked with hunting down the most dangerous of beasts and spellcasters who would threaten the main battle line of the 100 Kingdoms force. Their dedicated professionalism has spelled the doom to countless dangerous foes across hundreds of battles. Longbowmen. The cornerstone to many a commander's battle plan, the longbowmen of the 100 Kingdoms are a tremendous addition to any force. Providing a withering amount of long-range firepower, these troops fulfill a vital role in the 100 Kingdoms war machine, militia bowmen. Centuries ago, the Emperor, backed by the Orders, came to an agreement with the largest noble houses at the Council of Lient. In return for a significant reduction of their scutage's fees, money paid instead of feudal service, they agreed to allow the Order to help them train and equip their militias. Since that memorable day, the Order of the Sealed Temple has hired countless veterans to help train local militias throughout the kingdoms, scattering these potentially volatile men while putting their experience to good use. Coupled with the prodigious amounts of wealth the Order has spent in arming and equipping these militias, as well as their tireless effort of the servites in ensuring these arms and armor are well distributed, almost every town and village possesses a well-armed and equipped militia. The Militia Act has been one of the most stabilizing and far-reaching reforms ever implemented in the 100 Kingdoms, curbing the power of the noble lords while helping the population defend itself against outside threats. This holds doubly true in the old Imperial province of Breonia, where the peasantry has mastered the use of the longbow. So effective is this weapon that local authority can seldom be enforced, with banditry and poaching often supplementing the income of the peasant class. Some turn to more noble pursuits, forming mercenary bands whose skills and prowess are in much demand across the kingdoms. Mercenary crossbowmen. The crossbow represents a significant technological improvement over the bow and longbow. While some could argue that the longbow's increased range and rate of fire outclass the crossbow, mastery of that massive weapon requires years, while a man can learn to completely care for and use a crossbow in a matter of days. This factor has made crossbow the favorite weapon of mercenary companies throughout the 100 Kingdoms, or at least those who do not balk at the cost of the device itself. The most reliable and famous, as well as wealthiest of such companies, are the Genorici Free Companies. These companies are the spiritual descendants of the crossbow-armed mercenaries that the infamous mercenary Danilo Mek found instrumental in keeping his enemies from the walls of his camp and in time from the city of Girona that grew there. While they do not possess a monopoly on the weapon design or its use, centuries of experience with the manufacture, use, and repair of these deadly devices have granted the Genorici a tremendous advantage. While many mercenary companies boast a complement of crossbowmen in their employ, few can match the versatility, fire drill, or accuracy of the Genorici. Their extensive training and broad range of equipment allows them to have the use of heavy arbalests in defensive formations for siege battles, as well as use the lighter weapons while ranging in advance of the army as skirmishers. Order of the Sealed Temple. Despite its long evolution from an ancient infantry legion into an order of mounted knights, the world sees today, the Order of the Sealed Temple has never wavered from its mandates to protect its charge from a hostile world. More worldly and political involved than all other orders, this order has proven equally adept at wielding the velvet glove of wealth and influence or the iron fist of battlefield superiority. On the battlefield, these paragons of the chivalric ideal are horsemen without peer, using their speed and maneuverability to deliver powerful charges where the enemy is least prepared. Household Guard. Even in these days of trade and wealth, the vast majority of the noble houses of the 100 Kingdoms ascribe to Charles Armalutem's famous maxim, "Power flows from the edge of the blade." As a result, the noble houses have long conspired to maintain their monopoly on the right to field the true military force. Following the death of the emperor and the collapse of the imperial institutions, it was the nobility who hobbled the orders and limited their ability to intervene in their personal feuds and conflicts. While they gleefully point fingers to the influence of the orders as the main culprits behind the survival of the Animus Possendi imperial decree, the truth is that with noble support, the church could have eliminated the last barrier to their possession of real armed force. They even tried to eliminate the independent imperial legions, successfully disbanding the majority of them, stemmed in their attempts only by the efforts of the first chamberlain and the loyalty of the Steel Legion. The subtle and often less than subtle machinations of the nobility have paid off, while the orders and the imperial remnants might be more powerful than even the greatest noble or two put together. The overwhelming majority of the military power of the 100 Kingdoms rests in the hands of the nobility, and at the heart of their power one can find the household guard. Recruiting the best men their money can buy, the household guard is often an eclectic mix of veterans, washed-out legionnaires, foreign mercenaries, and the younger progeny of a lesser nobility with few alternative prospects. An armmaster is often employed by the noble houses to keep these powerful and difficult men in check. These hardened-bitten warriors are fierce, tougher, and deadlier than any of the men they lead, and implicitly trusted by the noble houses that many employ them, as they often serve as bodyguards, champions, and executioners. While their equipment may vary from household to household, the oldest noble house have employed the same arms and equipment for centuries. A mixture of function and form, each of their household guard is armored a heavy breastplate over mail or padding and a halberd. The wealthier the family, the more ornate the armor and helmet. But one thing can be guaranteed, it will be functional. The halberd has been the traditional ceremonial weapon of all guards in the 100 Kingdoms for centuries, and the household guard are no exception. These veterans, however, have mastered the weapon to a degree that masked through levies that commonly wield them could not hope to match. On the field of battle, it is not uncommon to see the master of the house leading the household guard in person, leaving the gallant antics of knightly combat to the younger generation, and with his safety guaranteed by the presence of his trusted arm master, many a veteran noble lord has swung a battle by leading his household guard to shatter the enemy's infantry lines. Men-at-Arms. The bulk of the armed forces of the 100 Kingdoms today is composed of well-equipped professional soldiers called men-at-arms. In the early days of the 100 Kingdoms, these men were referred to as sergeant-at-arms and were beholden to their feudal lords. They were granted plots of land in exchange for their services, most commonly as a soldier in the lord's retinue. This privileged positions allowed them not only to secure quality armors and armor, but also to train in the use of the sword, a weapon hitherto limited to the nobility. This led to the creation of a landed elite, the gentry whose standing was higher than the freedmen enjoyed, but still below that of the nobility. These were the soldiers with which Charles Armatulem established his empire. As time wore on and the 100 Kingdoms prospered, this old-fashioned feudal service was slowly abandoned. The sergeants were tied to their land, and the growing military needs of the empire could no longer be met by men who could not travel or establish long-term garrisons because they needed to tend to their fields. Scutage, payment to one's lord in lieu of military service, became a norm, and professional soldiers who fought for coin quickly emerged to fill the void. The old landed gentry sought to differentiate themselves from these new arrivals and coined the term men-at-arms. Free from the need to work and protect their land, men-at-arms were able to focus exclusively on their martial pursuits, allowing them to march on extended campaigns and travel in search of employment, ensuring that sufficient trained men were available to all commanders with a coin to spend in securing their services. While ranging from ragtag mercenary companies to well-trained and drilled household forces of the major noble houses, constant warfare weeds out the incompetent and duplicitous, making the men-at-arms the backbone of the 100 Kingdoms war machine. Household Knights. The time, effort, and money required to train a knight is staggering. Training begins at the age of 7 when the young aspirant is trained as a page. Around the age of 14, weapons and horsemanship training are focused on, and the squire is expected to follow his master into battle if needed. By the age of 21, a prospective candidate is expected to have impressed his master sufficiently to earn his recommendation. Following the sweeping reforms of Charles Armatulem at the onset of his conquest, the ceremony of dubbing can only be performed by an imperial noble of at least the rank of Margrave or Count Palatine. The appointment, however, moreover, can only take place after a battle in which the prospective knight has blooded his blade. These mandates were established to ensure that only men of true prowess earn the rank of knight. Even with the empire dissolved, these mandates are well-preserved traditions, and those who ignore them make ridicule. In fact, a recurring article presented in the imperial conclaves is the appointment of Counts Palatine to replace those who may have fallen in battle or died of old age. As a result of these efforts, the household knights endure as a pillar of the social structure of the 100 Kingdoms. While land and coin have gained tremendous importance in determining the power of noble houses, allowing them to secure their services as mercenaries and men-at-arms, these cannot match the battlefield supremacy and prestige that household knights offer. The mass charge of household knights is one of the most powerful weapons at the disposal of a 100 Kingdoms commander. Hundreds of pounds of ardent metal and muscle forged through years of training and experience, they have shattered men, formations, and kingdoms throughout the ages. The Order of the Ashen Dawn. Exemplars, even amongst the superhumanly skilled orders, the Order of the Ashen Dawn are spoken of in hushed whispers and respectful tones even by those who are unlucky enough to count them as enemies. Clad in baroque armor of craftsmanship that has reduced master smiths to tears, these holy warriors are the definitive answer to the monsters and nightmares that plague mankind. They are the final guardians of the sealed temple and the keepers of its darkest treasures. Order of the Crimson Tower. The Order of the Crimson Tower has taken upon itself to combat one of the greatest scourges of mankind: war. They have forsaken the notion of eliminating it entirely, instead focusing on ensuring it causes as little collateral damage as possible. Incredibly scrupulous in securing employment, they not only demand their employer have a strong casus belli, legal reason for war, but demand from their employers that no looting or pillaging take place. Were they any less effective in combat, these terms would make them incredibly unpopular, but such is their prowess that many lords are willing to forsake the material gains of war in order to secure their service. The Gilded Legion. Trained and equipped to the highest standard, the Gilded Legion is one of the most feared forces in the 100 Kingdoms. Their immaculate formations present rank upon rank of unwavering halberd tips facing their opponent. Their eponymous gilded armor hides the dour mien of trained veterans, drilled to an inch of their life and sanity by the most ruthless and effective instructors found in the 100 Kingdoms. The Gilded Legion could have had a reputation and a history at least as storied as that of the Steel Legion, as both trace their origin to the first professional forces Charles Armatulem established in his bid for empire. Their position, however, as guardians of the Imperial Mint, their attendant duties as the protectors of the Imperial tax collectors, and the controversial past of their legion have all served to forever overshadow their accomplishment. During the days of the dissolution, the very first Chamberlain of the Empire, Georg Praferson, realized he would need an armed force he could depend on to safeguard his charge from the predations of the nobility. The nobility, of course, had realized the same, and the matter of the Imperial legions would be first discussed in the first conclave. The outcome was clear from the very beginning, and the legions would be ordered to disband. However, the Chamberlain did manage to secure one token force of his command. The Gilded Legion was assigned to the Chamberlain and his capacity as caretaker of the Mint. It was a mothballed military regiment, reduced by decades of garrison and guard duty to little more than glorified collection agents, revealed by the local populace for their graft and brutal methods. Its corrupted, prone to coin men presented no danger to the nobility's deep pockets. The denial of the Steel Legion to disband and the prolonged discussion of the first conclave gave the Chamberlain the time he needed. Striking with ruthlessness and methodical manner that would become the hallmark of his office, he ensured the survival of the Imperial dream by cleansing the one legion that was directly under his command. With the help of loyal men from the disbanded Legion of Smoke, he investigated and collected evidence on every last Gilded Guardsman. With incontrivable evidence of their corruption, he issued an arrest warrant on every member of the Gilded Legion but a handful who had proven above corruption. These rare individuals he promoted to positions of command throughout the Legion. The rest he rounded up and issued an ultimatum: reform or die. A few veterans, confident their long careers and shady connections would protect them, turned down the offer. They died the next day, their very execution serving as the first message to the nobility that the Chamberlain office had teeth. Those who agreed to reform were subject to the first ordeal, a training regimen developed by Aias Kepataris, the exiled polemarch of Tauria. Those who failed were condemned to heavy labor and were not seen again. Those who survived were awarded with a pardon and a new reward regiment. To limit the threat of gambling and dissolution, the legionnaire pay was moderate, in order to protect them from unwanted influences while ensuring leverage over them. Their families would live within the Gilded Legion compounds in Argem, and to ensure their loyalty, their honorable discharge divine dividend was increased to a princely sum, sufficient to provide for their family until death or put 2 children through the Imperial colleges of Argem. This sum was guaranteed for uncorrupted legionnaires. In the event of a legionnaire's death, the family received the entirety of the sum as a stipend for the rest of their years. These financial motives ensured that there would be no shortage of applicant legionnaires lining up before the cavernous gates of the Imperial Mint in Argem, assuming that is, they were ready to meet the strict requirements that developed over the centuries. The recruitment standards of the Gilded Legion today are even stricter than those of the Steel Legion. Each candidate must be able to prove 10 years of prior service in an armed and active unit. In addition, one must present 2 recommendation letters, at least one of which must be from a recognized Imperial servant of the rank of Lictor and above, which provided assurance of the individual's loyalty, skill, and character. Once a prospective candidate's credentials have been accepted, he must then endure the ordeal, a fitness regime based on the agogoge practiced in the city-states, one of the most ruthless training processes ever devised by men. While the hearts of the people would never be won despite the legion's restructuring, what once was hatred and loathing has turned into fearful contempt. In the end, the Gilded Legionnaires cared little, sharing common living grounds, their families befriending each other, their children growing together. The Gilded Legion has become more than a choice for many. It is a tradition and a way of life, often passing from one generation to the next. The bonds between its members as lasting and loyal as their dedication to their work. Following these reforms, the Gilded Legion became a powerful tool in the hands of the Chamberlain, ensuring the sanctity and safety of the Imperial Mint, the most influential Imperial institution under his control. Loath to waste such a valuable resource on petty squabbles, the Gilded Legion cannot be hired out as common mercenaries and remain committed to its guard and garrison duties. Their presence on the battlefield means the Chamberlain himself has vested interest in the outcome, a proposition almost as disheartening as facing these professional killers on the field. The Steel Legion. Upon the death of Otto IV, there were 6 Imperial legions in the field: the Gilded Legion, the Legion of Steel, the Adamantine Legion, the Legion of Ash, the Legion of Smoke, and the Argent Legion. In the chaos that followed, all but 2 of these were disbanded by the order of the Imperial Conclave. The only remnants left today of these once mighty institutions are the war colleges in Argem. The survival of the Gilded Legion was ensured by their critical role in safeguarding the sovereignty and independence of the Imperial Mint. The Steel Legion, on the other hand, survived by the simple expedient of refusing to disband. They pitched camp within the Callan fields of Argem and issued an ultimatum. They answered only to the Emperor. Until an Emperor sat on the hollow throne once more, they would serve the Empire. Despite the threats and condemnations by the members of the Conclave, none were foolish enough to challenge their position. Before things could escalate, the Conclave agreed to establish the office of Imperial Chamberlain, and the Steel Legion has since guaranteed the sanctity of Argem, the Imperial capital, and the office of Imperial Chamberlain. The Steel Legion is one of the oldest fighting forces in the Talian Empire, taking its name from the storied legions of the Old Dominion, and tracing its origins to the very first professional armies the Emperor fielded. Only the orders can claim a more storied past or glorious. When the Steel Legion took upon themselves the role of custodians of the Empire and guarantors of the Chamberlain, they forsook their traditional weaponry and armed themselves with great swords, traditionally the ceremonial weapon of the Adamantine Legion, the Emperor's now defunct bodyguards. With this act, the Steel Legion became the last surviving link between the glorious military history of the Armatellum dynasty and the 100 Kingdoms today. In the absence of an emperor, the Steel Legion is the single most prosperous and powerful mercenary company in the Empire. They sell their services widely, but only to those families that are waging war outside the Empire or who has a casus belli recognized by the Imperial Conclave. Their wealth is supplemented by a standing contract with the office of the Imperial Chamberlain to protect Argem from all aggressors. The nobles view this contract as little more than an artifice, a mechanism for the office of the Chamberlain to support one of the strongest and staunchest allies of the Imperial mandate behind the veneer of neutrality. To this day, no noble house has been willing to directly challenge the Steel Legion on these, or any other grounds for that matter. I really like the 100 Kingdoms. If you reach this point, remember to like, comment, subscribe, rate, whatever. It helps the channel grow. I'll see you in the next one. Arrivederci.